Next up, we have Miss Ita Duran. She is the Executive Director of Global Strategies and International Programs at MCPHS, Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. She has 7 years of experience in college admissions at MCPHS. She's also an expert in recruitment and institutional international strategy. Very global background. She speaks multiple languages, very multilingual. And she also received her master's from International Global Studies at the University of St. Thomas. And she will be going over the process, perception, and performance of international applicants to healthcare degrees in the United States. I think this year is the year where we realize the importance of all of our healthcare workers all around the world. So very excited to have you here, Ms. Ita Duran. Let's see you if you are here. Hi.
I'm here.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Selena. Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good, great.
How exciting, AirPods, how fun.
Yeah, something that might be encouraging for our students, hopefully, as this summer is a very different one. Yep. All right, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I just want to say how interesting to have listened to Jennifer speak. And I'm really happy that I was able to join this event. I work for the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. So it's a long name for a small university with a long history. We call it MCPHS for short, MCPHS, which is not much easier to say, is it? But what is unique about this university is that for 200 years, almost, it has always been exclusively specialized in healthcare programs. And that is why Korea Daily has asked me here today to speak with you about careers and studies in the healthcare field. Next slide. So as Selena said, I'm Executive Director of Global Strategy and International Programs at this school. And my responsibility here is to understand the healthcare industry in the United States, but also in many parts of the world, and to figure out how to accompany our international students to succeed in the many competitive careers of healthcare. Now, although I specialize in international students, and that's what I'll be focusing on, I know that a lot of you are US citizens, and I do believe that a lot of this is transferable to you. And in a way, I'd like to ask, because you're a US citizen, does that mean that you're not international? Actually, not at all. And I'll help you understand what I mean by that in a few slides. Next slide. So the first thing that we're going to look at is what is your goal? Here's the agenda that we're going to be talking about. And I want to talk about what your goal is and ask you to ask yourself a couple questions. We're going to be looking at what medical schools look for in a candidate. And what are the numbers? What's the reality of the statistics of admission to medical schools? We are going to be talking a lot about medical schools. Some of you maybe don't have that exact goal, but a lot of what we'll be saying about medical schools is transferable to other types of graduate professional schools in healthcare. So don't close your ears on that. We'll be talking about options. What are the other options than the traditional path to medical school? And I'll give you an example. Next slide. So let's start with your goals. I'm sure you've asked yourself this question many times, or at least I hope you have. And some of you, maybe some of your parents have said, well, the goal is to be a doctor. Now, as you ask yourself this question, what is your goal? I'd like you to take a deep dive into what do you know about this career? What does it reflect about who you are? And what does it say about what you want? What do you know about being a doctor? What do you know about medical school? Next slide. Have you confronted your image of your ideal career with the reality of that career and the practitioner's daily life? So you might ask me, well, how do I do that exactly when I'm a student, especially now if I'm a student in quarantine? Well, you talk to people. and you talk to the right people. And if you're a student in high school, you might think, well, so how exactly do I get access to those professionals who I want to talk to? You'd be surprised if you look around in your own family network. You'll have a family doctor, you'll have an uncle who's a doctor, or an aunt who's a nurse. Around you, you will know healthcare practitioners. And you'd be surprised how they're actually very willing to talk about their careers. I always advise my students to begin with an email. After taking stock of your network, begin with an email to these contacts. Tell them how you admire their career, how you aspire to be like them, and how you would love to just ask them a couple questions. Tell them how you respect their time. You know, it's similar to what Jennifer was saying. Put yourself, in their shoes and talk to them as persons and say, I know you're really busy, especially in these times, but I only have a couple questions. And then out of that respect, think about those questions. Why do you want to ask those questions? Think about, what are you going to do with those answers? How are those answers and the information that you're going to get from this interview, how is that going to impact your decision? It's really important to know what a doctor, or whatever that goal is, whatever that dream career is, what does that person do every single day of their life? Because it's a big commitment you're going to make when you do make that decision. Outside of the quarantine and this world that, the situation that we're living in, I'd advise students to go on observation periods. Of course, we can't do that right now, but just these interviews would give you a really good in-depth look sometimes of what that means. I remember interviewing an applicant for our 3-year accelerated Bachelor of Pharmacy program. And during the interview, I found out that she actually had an aversion to touching people. Well, if any of you, know a little bit about what a nurse does, their daily life goes well beyond, their daily tasks go well beyond taking a temperature with a thermometer. It can be very intimate relationship with a patient's hygiene, their person. They feed the patients. They have to assist with many of the services that the hospital provides in a very close proximity. So that career was not the right career for that student. So today she's studying public health. And we can talk about that on a different occasion. But the point I'm trying to make is you really need to know, what does it mean? If you want to be a doctor, okay, what kind of a doctor? So for example, you want to be a doctor, all right? You want to be an MD. So does that mean that you see yourself, let's say, do you see yourself as a doctor in a basement, in the dark, looking at screens, very little patient contact, going through screens 8 to 10 hours a day? Next slide. Well, that's a doctor. Some kinds of doctors. That's a radiologist. And a radiologist is just as much a doctor as your family doctor or your pediatrician. They've gone through undergraduate studies. They've made it into and attended medical school. They passed the USMLE, did a residency, sometimes a fellowship, and after 10 to 12 years, they're a full radiologist. So you need to think about what you want to get out of being a doctor. So maybe that's not the image you had in mind when you were thinking of working in healthcare. Next slide. Maybe this image is more the kind of image you were thinking of. Collaboration, teamwork, working directly with patients on a daily basis, seeing the patients get better and having that personal gratification. Well, there aren't MDs in this photo. Here we have physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, registered nurses. We have a doctor of pharmacy. There are many other careers and roles in healthcare that might be worth looking at. Next slide. Now, you've chosen healthcare. Well, I want to congratulate you if you have, because it's a great choice of career. The healthcare industry is one of the most innovative, fastest growing industries, not only in the United States, but around the world. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, we talk about jobs in the US, but there is no segment of the American healthcare industry, and even at the most basic levels, that is not influenced and impacted by international trends. I mean, the situation that we're living in today is a perfect example of that. And this is where being international, having an international background, being sensitive to interculturalism comes into play. And we all have that, even if you're a US citizen, and most particularly because US citizens are so multicultural. I encourage students to reinforce their connection to these intercultural skills that their own identity allows. Of course, this starts with a foreign language. We immediately think, oh, well, if I could speak Spanish. Well, yes, that's true. I work with employers very often to talk about how our international students can best enter the workforce when they graduate from MCPHS. One of the first things employers say after, of course, they look at assuring that the student has all the right credentials and training is, do they speak a foreign language? You'd be surprised how much those resumes with a foreign language, and even just an inkling of a foreign language, not necessarily fluency, get to the top of that pile, get top of the resume file. But speaking a foreign language isn't the only skill. It's also an understanding or even an open-mindedness about the different cultures that are around you, and even if, and particularly I would say, a different culture that you might have a personal connection to. The patient pool around the United States is very diversified, is more and more diversified, and a practitioner who knows not only to speak the language, but also who is able to understand the healthcare experience of the patient that they're talking to, and that healthcare experience can be a healthcare experience that they've had from another country, and the relationship that that patient might have to healthcare, to medicine, to a practitioner. That can be an invaluable understanding to provide better service and care to that patient. We can take one example of traditional medicine. I know a lot of you are Korean or East Asian. Traditional medicine is still a very, very important part of healthcare in the Eastern Asian culture, even in South Asian culture. Well, if you're a practitioner here and you have not only an understanding, but if possible, a little bit of experience in that medicine, you are going to be able to speak, discuss, and make recommendations in a much more intimate way with your patients than someone who does not have that understanding. So the point is, healthcare is global, even at the very local level. Now let's go on to the next slide. Of course, today we're talking so much about what's happening on a global level in healthcare, the actions that are being taken, hopefully with some cohesion around the world. Well, let's look at these two organizations who monitor not only the health of the world, but the health of world populations, but also monitor the needs for a better health of the international populations. And they monitor the jobs that are going to be needed, the skills and the number of people that will be needed in the future. And their projections are that we're going to be moving from 125 million people over the age of 80 to today to 430 million people over that age in 2050. And we're going to need specialists to know how to best take care of them. We're going to need different types of healthcare jobs, different types of knowledge. The WHO, the World Health Organization, estimates that there are going to be 40 million new job creations in healthcare just by 2030. We're going to need, and if we continue at this pace, if we don't train good healthcare practitioners at a faster pace, we're going to be short of 18 million. So the job opportunities in healthcare are growing. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about, this is just US specific. So this is how, per profession, the US Labor Department sees healthcare positions growing. So you've got the growth here in the middle column, and then you've got the columns on the right. you're looking at mostly double-digit growth in 10 years. And I'm really interested to read what some of those jobs are. For example, you look at things like genetic counselors. Have you ever heard of a genetic counselor? A genetic counselor is someone who studies the implication of genetics on an individual or a family's health and projects how their health can evolve due to their genetics. Medical scientists that's just one group of a vast number of types of professions. You've got cancer researchers in that. You've got gerontologists who are talking about studying the needs of the elderly, histologists, immunochemists. Some of these words I have to look and read because I don't even remember them. Industrial pharmacists, here we are today, coming back to the current situation, are needed, are in lack, and research in the development of medications has never been more important. I can tell you statistically that students of your generation are going to be working in jobs that don't exist today. And the reason I bring that to you is because it's important for you to keep an open mind in setting your goals. But let's look at other careers because we're talking a lot about healthcare. Let's take a look at other projections just to compare. Same departments, US labor statistics, and same method of projections. Look at how all of a sudden the job growth in these professions goes down to single digits in 10 years. Salaries, quite honestly, I think healthcare holds their own. So I've talked a lot about healthcare and encouraging you to consider healthcare, but let's talk about how to get there, how to get to your goal. Next slide, please. Actually, I think we're behind on the slide. So the slide that you're looking at now is the slide about the healthcare projections outside of the labor projections outside of healthcare. I wasn't looking at the slides that you were looking at. And this is the comment that I was making about how the growth in healthcare here is in single digits compared to double-digit growth in the healthcare industry. Thank you. So next slide. I'll keep an eye on the slides from now on. So how do I get to my goal? This is the traditional path for a high school student in North America, like you, to get to a doctorate. And this can be an MD, a medical doctor, but it's pretty much the same path for many other doctorates, and we'll talk about that. So let me explain. The first maroon block, those are undergraduate studies. So after high school, you're going to go to get the prerequisites that are needed by the professional graduate schools, the medical school. And those prerequisites are usually done in undergraduate colleges or universities. Towards the end of those studies, you're going to pass the MCAT or any other kind of entrance examination. Different graduate schools have different types of entrance examinations. The MCAT is for medical school. Let's say you do great on the MCAT, you get into medical school, and that's going to take you, depending on what kind of professional graduate school you've entered, it can take between 2 to 4 years. Medical school will be 4 years. In your third year of medical school, you're going to start actually sitting your licensure exam. So for most practitioners, their practice is regulated by a board, and you need to be licensed to practice. That license is tied to a geographic setting. So what we're talking about here is the USMLE, which is United States Medical Licensing Examination. Other doctorates will have other types of licensing examinations. So you start in your third year for the USMLE, and so for third and fourth years, and towards the end of your studies in medical school, you'll be passing the different phases of the licensing examination. You pass the licensing examination, graduate from medical school, and here you are, a doctor. but you're not ready to go out on the job market just yet, because now you're going to have to go to a residency. Now, how do you get into that residency? It's not only an application process, but it's a matching process. You're going to say exactly what type of residency you're looking at, what interests you, what type of job you'd like to work in after going to medical or after the residency. And then we're going to be matching your choices or your wishes with the types of residencies that are available in different hospitals, clinics, and institutions around the United States. You can also do a fellowship. Some do a residency and a fellowship. A fellowship is for those who are interested in more of a research experience. But you know what we're going to do now is we're going to go backwards. So here you are. I've got my little doctor here on one side of the slide. We're going to go back to the residency. For that doctor to get that wonderful position as a doctor, let's say he's going to be a pediatrician in the #1 hospital, children's hospital in the United States, Boston Children's Hospital. I just think of them because they're across the street from us. Well, he's going to have a very, very good residency and or fellowship. The residency that you are able to get is going to set the tone for your professional career for the few years coming out of residency. So how do you get that really good residency? Well, believe it or not, the experience that you've had during medical school and before medical school, and how you're able to explain how you are excellent individually during the interview, that's what's going to get you the right residency, where you've done your rotation. So in medical school, you have 2 years of foundational studies and 2 years of rotations. Those rotations mean you're going around in different services, in different hospitals or clinics or institutions, training on very specific skills. During those rotations, you're building your network, you're gaining experience, and you're also building your resume. Next slide. Now, what are medical schools looking for? And that's something that is really tricky because, of course, you think, oh, well, they're looking for the best students. You know what? That's true, but it's not just the way you think it is, because it's not all about GPA. What medical schools want to graduate, for the most part, is they want to graduate the best doctors who are going to be leaders in the healthcare industry. So you think, well, medical schools then are going to train leaders. Actually, medical schools want to recruit leaders and turn them into great doctors. So in order for you to really differentiate yourself in your application to medical school, you need to have a story to tell. Next slide. You need to say, why are you exceptional? What have you done that is different from others? How do you show that you are dedicated? How do you show that you are committed? How do you show that you really are going to achieve something? You know, it's important to notice that I'm not saying, how can you say you're going to achieve something? That part's easy. You can write a great essay, but you need to be able to say, this is what I did. This is what I achieved. Here's proof of what I can do. And I think about one of our students here, for example, Ariana, who she had very challenging experiences because she chose to do her clinical rotations in the remote mountains of the Amazon, Bolivia. She did one there and then one in Peru with rural communities and indigenous communities. And when you hear her talk about that experience, you immediately want to hire this girl because this young lady, this doctor, or actually a physician's assistant, she's a physician's assistant. You immediately want to hire her because you can feel how she's passionate, but not only passionate, how she's achieved her goals and how eloquent she is. I put her blog on there because if you want to take a look, the way she explains her experience tells you what kind of a quality practitioner she is. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Whatever your experience is, it should be your own, it should be unique, but be able to tell what you've achieved and how you've done it. Now, of course, next slide. It's not all a matter of just saying, oh, I'm going to go to college, and in my 4th year, I'll definitely do something. What medical schools want to see is your work ethic. They want to see that you can set goals, you can plan, you can organize, you can achieve, you can commit, and you can impact change. This other student, he's a student optometrist. And what he did was go back to Nicaraguan village for 3 years, talk about the importance of checking your eyesight and delivering free eye exams to children in rural villages of Nicaragua. After 3 years, as you can see here how proud he is, he was able to offer in one summer over 4,000 eye exams. Think about how he will be able to explain in his interview, for his application, for his admission to the School of Optometry, how he is able to commit, achieve, and affect change. Here you are, he's a leader already in his community, even though he hasn't even made it to his professional school. Next slide. So seek out the opportunities to build your network. Of course, everything we're talking about right now is things that we could do in the past, that we could do this kind of moving around and meeting people and networking before we were in quarantine. Today we're in quarantine. So service learning abroad today is compromised, yes, but it's the idea that is important to understand. Internships are possible virtually. Jennifer gave some great examples. Volunteering is possible virtually. Even hospital positions are possible. We have students who are volunteering as international ambassadors in some of the hospitals around the school. And I'll show you you can see in the photo some of the hospitals that are around MCPHS. Another really great way to enrich your knowledge and also network and meet people in the field is undergraduate research opportunities. Next slide. So go on to the next slide, please. Undergraduate research is something that seems a little strange between undergraduate and research. Research is usually thought of in graduate terms, but we have many undergraduate students who are very interested in research. And at MCPHS, we created a center for undergraduate research so that you can start that very early in your career, very early in your academics. And these are serious research projects where students integrate professional research teams around in the hospitals around where we are. And some of them are even able to publish. And this is fantastic for resume building. And again, we talked about network building. The people that you meet, those are the people that are going to later on be your references. And the institutions you volunteer for or work with in this type of opportunity, those are institutions that you'll be able to get on your resume. Next slide. So it's interesting to take a look at the network and the location of the schools that you're applying to, because these extracurricular, if we can call them, even though a lot of them are organized by the school, or extra academic experiences are facilitated or should be facilitated by the school that you choose. And that's really important, to get into a school that's going to give you networking opportunities, that has a good foothold in the industry, particularly in the healthcare industry. Quite honestly, in any industry you decide to work in. But since we're talking about healthcare, I'll talk about the healthcare industry. Proximity to those institutions is important, but also having faculty that have a position that is still active and professional, and that and a faculty who is generous with their connections and will help you get that foot in the door. That is so important. Next slide. So let's take a quick look at statistics for medical schools. Medical schools in North America, or in, I should say, in the United States, are called American Medical Colleges, or AMCs. Next slide. A lot of stuff on this slide. You don't need to read everything. And I'm sure that Korea Daily will make this slideshow available to you. What's important is to be able to Google AMC admission data, AMC matriculation data. Here you see in 2019 to 2020, so that was fall 2019, there were over 53,000 applicants to American Medical Colleges, AMCs. Next slide. And in this next slide, you'll see the number of actual matriculants. Now you have to understand that in the past slide, when we saw applicants, those are applicants who actually made it all the way to complete their application. And here we're looking at those who actually made it to enroll into admissions. One thing you need to understand also is that a big part of enrolling into a medical school is the financial piece. Medical schools are very expensive. You need to plan that very early on. Next slide. I'll give you some quick statistics about international students. Not all medical schools accept non-US or non-permanent residents, non-US citizens or permanent residents. So if you bring those same statistics down to international students, whereas before we were looking at 40% of actual matriculants, here we're looking at just 10%. And that, these statistics oscillate between, they can go down to 0.5%, they can go up to 3%, but that just gives you an idea, and every year is different. And here again, particularly for international students, the biggest obstacle really are finances, because many medical schools will ask international applicants to pay either a year or sometimes all 4 years up front. And as you can imagine, that's really a tough challenge for most families. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is know yourself and keep your options open. Don't neglect your plan B. Think about other types of practitioners where where you can get that same kind of gratification. We talked about physician's assistants. There's doctor of pharmacy. There's doctor of physical therapy. Doctor of optometry, we mentioned. Doctor of occupational therapy is really growing these days. None of these doctorates go to medical schools, although they are clinical doctorates, and they have their own specific, for most of them, own specific graduate professional schools. But all of them, they offer job stability. You have high-paying salaries. You have growth in opportunity, as we saw. And most importantly, you have the ability to have a fulfilling career offering direct patient care. So think about your plan B, even have a plan C. For some students who are just intent on maintaining that plan A for medical school, the plan B might be Europe. We have a lot of students going to medical school in Europe. You have to think about that one because US healthcare is known for its medical education, its cutting edge innovation, and the groundbreaking medical research that it does. So it's respected globally. However, some students do choose going to Europe. Think about also in many of the European medical schools, classes are taught in English, but everything else, the entire environment that you're in, is going to be in a different language. Keep that in mind. Then you've got programs that are direct entry. Next slide. And this is just one example. You have universities like MCPHS and many others who get very creative about the program, about helping students have more of a direct path of getting into medical schools. Next slide. In this pathway, for example, you will have 3 years of undergraduate, and then you have the option of going into medical school either at your 3rd year or waiting in the 4th year, getting to know yourself better, and then going on to medical school or any other type of graduate school after your 4th year. You still have to go through your undergraduate studies in this type of situation. Next slide. Some students will prefer the undergraduate study opportunity because it's the college experience. You have to be very, very mature and know yourself very well in order to go straight into medical school out of high school. Some of those paths do exist, but know that there are advantages. Even though you lose some time, and of course you have to pay the tuition, there are many advantages. We talked about the opportunities, but we also talked about the networking to attend the undergraduate university. I think I ran over my time, so we're going to pass on to the Q&A. I pretty much went through everything. You can go on to the next slide. Selena, I think I talked too much. It's up to you now.
Right? Hi.
Hi.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We do have a lot of questions, Ms. Duran. As you said, it is very important right now, seeing in the global world how much American medical associations and students here impact everybody worldwide. There is a question from Bara Choi. Do you have any advice who we should reach out to if we have no family or friends in the healthcare field? Should I just contact my local hospital? And reading that, my additional question would be, if you can't have an internship or fellowship at a local hospital right now due to COVID, what can medical students or potential medical students do to surpass that?
Okay, great. Two fantastic questions. The first question is, if I don't know a doctor, and this is an exercise that you want to do not just for this type of research, but you also want to do when you're doing your job research, is your network extends beyond just that first contact. So, you know how you have in social media, you've got your actual followers, you've got your actual contacts, and then you've got secondary and third. That's how it works also. Maybe you have an aunt who knows a nurse, or maybe you have an uncle whose neighbor is a doctor. If you're talking to people, letting them know what your goal is, letting them know that you would really like to talk to this kind of health practitioner, most students find out that in their broader network, they do have a contact available. If the family doesn't work, if the friends don't work, your high school can also help you. You might have medical personnel in the high school. Don't forget that. Maybe some local associations will have volunteer nurses who come in to help. If you sit down and just think about it and take inventory of your contacts, you'd be surprised at how many people you can actually reach just through secondary contacts. Now, internships in this quarantine. I don't know that I would agree that you cannot do internships. Internships take on a different face. They're organized differently. They have different logistics, but you can do internships virtually. We even have some of our students doing their rotations virtually, believe it or not. Our sixth year doctor of pharmacy students, they have a full year of rotations, 6 rotations, 6 weeks, and they're doing some of those rotations virtually. So it is possible, and it's really a matter, again, of going out to your network and saying, what can I do to help?
I didn't know that students were taking that virtually. And then another follow-up question was for interviews. How has COVID-19 changed the interview process, especially for medical fields, whether you're a fresh grad or a postgraduate school?
Well, I'd say that they've changed mostly in the way that each person approaches the actual interview. The number of students interviewed or the actual criteria being evaluated during the interview, that hasn't really changed. What we need to be more careful, and Jennifer alluded to this, is how you approach that interview. You have to be careful because all of a sudden things that weren't that important before become important. your body language becomes very important. Now all of a sudden it's the body language from the shoulders up. Are you sitting up straight? I hope I haven't made any of those mistakes. I probably have. Looking into the camera, being engaged with the people that you're talking to. That was part of the interview process before anyway. But it's just a matter of the technology more than anything. We're still doing interviews at MCPHS. We already did interviews through virtual platforms before quarantine. And I'd say that the biggest difficulty in at least the students I work with virtual platforms is the language. Any type of weakness in the language comes out that much more during a virtual interview because you don't have that proximity, that personal distance. You're not able to read the person who's talking to you in a more holistic body language, with a more holistic body language. So it's important to practice your English, to be comfortable with your English, to practice what you're going to say, to practice your answers. Rehearsing in front of a mirror, there's nothing wrong with that. I encourage you to do that as much as you can in English. And that's the kind of things that I think would be the most impacted.
Mm-hmm. And beyond that, additionally, how has MCAT and the admissions process changed for students who want to go into the medical field currently due to COVID?
So that is, like so many questions with the pandemic, it's a moving target. It changes, maybe not every day, maybe not every week, but every couple of weeks there's a change. So students need to be constantly looking at the MCAT website, sign up for emails. We don't look at emails anymore. Unfortunately, that's how most institutions and most agencies communicate with students. So don't miss your emails, and be adaptable, because you're going to have to change your plans. And I think that's the only constant for the next year, is things will change.
Yeah, things are changing very quickly. Ms. Duran, I do want to say thank you again for taking time out of the day to speak to us. There are lots of students who want to go into the medical field right now, and as you are an expert, it's been very, very helpful. I hope that the students are able to take what they have learned today and apply that to their current admission process right now, and hopefully become better and more doctors in the world, nurses in the world, healthcare professionals that we need right now, that we have seen, that we always lack and are grateful for. So again, thank you today so much for your time. And should our students have more questions, where can they reach out to?
If the moderator can go up to the third slide, my email is on there. It's my first name dot last name.
Okay, so if you guys are watching, please just scroll back, and you guys will be able to see from the timeline her email address, and please, thank you. Please feel free to reach out to her. And Ms. Duran, thank you so much again for joining us and completing our first session of the workshop. We really, really appreciate it, and your time and taking your Saturday morning out to speak with us, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Selena. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.